Right, once again, I'm reviewing the homework from last evening where we're talking about relations and functions. So let's take a look at number 3. And I'll go through a couple of these so you can get the idea of how to do this. Now, number 3, again, we're trying to determine whether a relation is a function or not, and we want to determine the domain and range. It's telling us to use the vertical line test to determine whether each graph is a relation or a function, and then to state the domain and range using interval notation. Now, a vertical line test, what that tells me is I can draw a vertical line through any point in my function, and it's only going to go through once. If you notice here, that line only went through once. Goes through once. I can keep doing this, and guess what? It's only going to go through once every time I do that. That means this is a function. Every input has only one output. Now we have to state our domain and range using interval notation. So the domain represents all of our inputs, or our x-axis right here. I'll make that a bit thicker too so you can see that. So what are all of our x values? You'll notice that the first point here, our x value here is 0. And you notice it's a solid dot, so I'm going to go with a bracket, 0. Now you notice my function extends all the way across, all the way to here, and that's where it ends. This dot is open, it is not colored in. So you'll notice that this ends on the 8 here on our x-axis, and since it's an open dot, not closed, I'm going to go with parentheses, because it doesn't include the 8. It means everything up to including 8. So that's my domain. Now for my range, what I'm going to be looking at are my y values. So I'm going to establish that here on my axis, top and bottom of my function. See, I'm going to start from the bottom here. The bottom of my function starts, I'm going to use a different color even too, right here at 3 on my y-axis. And you'll notice that that's a solid dot. And actually that's a -3. So it's going to be -3. And you'll notice my function goes all the way up to here to 1 on the y-axis. And again, we have a solid dot, so that's going to be +1. So I've established that, yes, this is a function. I've established my domain and range. Remember, the domain is the x-axis, the range is the y. Let's do another one of these. Let's see, I'm going to skip down to C here. See, this is an interesting looking function, so we're going to work with this one here. So first of all, I already gave away that it's a function, but watch this. I can do the vertical line test. If I zoom in really tight here, I might have to do a very thin line. But you notice that the line still only goes through once, even though there's a curve here. Might not be like the typical function that you're used to seeing, but that's okay. Every time I draw a vertical line, it's only going through once. It tells me that, yes, we have a function here. As for my domain, remember, that's the x-axis, so I'll go with green, make it a little thicker. That means my whole x-axis, what's represented here. You'll notice that I have an arrow on both ends. That means it goes on forever. So there's no real start and end point. So for my domain, it starts all the way at -infinity and goes on to +infinity. Now, we use parentheses for that because infinity doesn't end. There's no real end point. It just keeps going. Now, as far as my range, remember my range, once again, represents the y-axis here, the top to the bottom of my function. Now, there's my top. It's pretty easy to establish. Now, my bottom, you notice that this arrow goes on forever. So that means there's no real bottom. It just goes on forever. So for my range here, it's going to be -infinity, because again, these can just go on. They're going to keep going lower. But the top of it ends very specifically. There's an end point here. You'll notice that's a solid dot too, and that's at +4. So it ends at +4, and you get a bracket for that. All right, let's do one more of these. We're going to do F here, and here's why. Let's use our vertical line test. I'm going to draw a vertical line here. Wait a second, what's going on? It crosses twice. Let's try that again. Crosses twice. That's not supposed to happen. This did not pass my vertical line test. That means we do not have a function here. However, we still have a domain and range that we can deal with. Let's talk a little bit about that. Now remember, the domain represents your x-axis. So where does it start? Where does it end? You'll notice that your x-axis is going to start it starts right there, right there on our origin line, right on our axis. That goes in this direction, and then we have arrows that indicate goes on forever. So what's our domain going to be? Starts at the origin, so that's going to be 0, and you'll notice it's a solid dot, so I'm using a bracket. And then it's going to go on forever, which means I'm going to get positive infinity, which we use parentheses because infinity never ends. Now for our range, let's take a look at the range now. Now, remember, that's the top and bottom, essentially. Where is it, begin and end going on the y-axis here? Now, you see some dots, but if you look at the very end here, right, the lowest point, that's got an arrow. Our highest point has an arrow as well, which means this goes on forever. If we were to watch this, it keeps going. It also keeps going in this direction. So guess what? If it keeps going in each direction, you're looking at infinity there. So we have negative infinity, and we have positive infinity. So those are 3 examples, and I'd like to see how you guys do with the rest of these. So if you had struggled a bit, try D and E on your own, but as well as B, but now you have some guidance. You know that, 1, use your vertical line test for a function. If it goes through once, you got a function. If it goes through more than once, you don't have a function. Domain is looking horizontally. Where does it begin? Where does it end? Range, looking at vertically. Where does it begin? Where does it end?